Hi, everyone. On to our next presentation. I'm John Puelko, longtime porcupine here in the Manchester area. I'm a teacher at Latitude Learning Resources for those homeschoolers out there. And I'm really happy to introduce Larry Sanger, an American internet project developer and philosopher, co-founder of the online encyclopedia, Wikipedia. So please welcome Larry Sanger.
Thank you. So, yes, my name is Larry Sanger, and my claim to infamy is that I am a co-founder. Sometimes I call myself an ex-founder of Wikipedia. My academic career and my first career was in philosophy, but I've spent most of the last 20 years of my career working on nonprofit reference and educational websites. I started a project called the Encyclosphere. It's not a new encyclopedia. It's an open network of all of the encyclopedias. And there's a big difference. Briefly, our vision for the Encyclosphere is this. We will convert the content of all the encyclopedias in the world into a standard format. We will make all that data publicly available, either free articles or metadata about proprietary articles, and we will give you the tools you need to build your own article collections and search engines. So just imagine what programmers could build with access to all of that data, kept constantly up to date, as well as some ready-made platform for displaying it, kind of like WordPress, but for encyclopedias. To support this vision, I got some friends together to start the 100% nonprofit Knowledge Standards Foundation. And in this speech, I will give you a progress report about the work of the KSF. I will situate it as a response to the problems of the centralized, censored internet of 2022. So here we go. Champions of free speech, let's talk. People who 10 years ago would have been able to speak out publicly without any difficulty are being increasingly censored by the giants of Silicon Valley. And, yes, by countries around the world, whether in the hands of powerful multinational corporations or governments, people with controversial and heretical points of view are, like it or not, being removed from the main avenues of public discourse. And this is shockingly inconsistent with the principles of free democratic societies, where open, vigorous discourse has been regarded as the lifeblood of a healthy society for centuries. We no longer need to argue about whether big tech might start a program of political censorship. They are now very open about their willingness to wield their hegemonic corporate power to exert political influence. And they do that all around the world. And the governments use the same technologies to the same ends. And we, ordinary people, are left in a situation in which we have less and less control over our experience online. For those of us who still value a truly open society, what can we do? We can dream of giving big tech the boot, but what can we really do? Open-minded people have built alternate platforms. Alternate platforms, sites, social media sites like Minds and Gab have already been launched. Gab's reputation took a hit in its first few years. And Parler came online and was effectively shut down for several weeks, and they still haven't fully recovered from that. You probably remember that. Getter was promoted as the next standard bearer of free speech conservatism. And Unsurprisingly, President Trump is poised to launch Truth Social, his own free speech social media network. There were also a few liberal alternatives, which never quite took off, including Mastodon, the flagship instance of the broader Fediverse network. Of those sites that I mentioned, Gab actually leads in traffic, according to Alexa.com. And as to video, there are free speech alternatives to YouTube, like Rumble and BitChute and the local favorite here, Odyssey. Okay. And as with social media alternatives, not all alternative video sites are explicitly conservative projects. When it comes to encyclopedias, now, there are many alternatives to Wikipedia. Much of this speech will describe a way of networking together these alternatives. Protecting free speech, protecting free speech and providing social media platforms is important work, and I'm grateful to the people behind the many startups doing this work. But there's a problem, a big problem with all of them. We already know that the strategy of Silicon Valley and the corporate world generally is to capture and control whatever successful platforms come down the pike, or shut down those that refuse to be, or shut out the ones anyway, that refuse to be captured. Now, that's not cool, but it's what we've come to expect from these corporate platforms. You may say, but Gab and Rumble would never sell out. Are you aware that Twitter and YouTube both began about 15 years ago as the standard bearers of the free speech internet? It's true. They aren't anymore. Here's another idea you may have already heard about. The only way that we can guarantee free speech in the long term is if we stop building centralized platforms altogether and that connect everyone to the same giant hub, which gets broken. Instead, start building free and open networks like the internet used to be and was originally intended to be. But what does that mean in practical terms? Well, the KSF is dedicated to dealing with these practical issues. We incorporated, as I said, in the fall of 2020 and were granted 501c3 status last summer. We've made good progress, which I hope might serve as an alternative model to how to meet the problems of tech tyranny. We're working on two projects, and both involve building decentralized content networks. You may be wondering what a decentralized content network is. I'll provide two examples. One is for social media, and the other is for encyclopedias. So let's begin with the social media project. So think about how Twitter works. When using Twitter's website or app, you log in, you compose a tweet, you hit tweet, and off goes your tweet to some of your followers, all controlled by an algorithm Twitter never reveals. The process happens within Twitter's own ecosystem. If you play the Twitter game well, you can get many thousands or millions of followers. But if you leave Twitter, you can't bring your followers with you, can you? If you quit or if Twitter bans you, you have no way to reach out to your Twitter followers. You can export your tweets, but they're pretty much useless outside of a system that Twitter exclusively controls. And since there is no social media standard in widespread use, you can't easily transfer your account to one of the alternatives I mentioned earlier. Twitter is a centralized system under their full control. And surprisingly, most of the alternative social media and video platforms like Gab, Getter, and Rumble, are also centralized in pretty much the same way. If it starts mattering, then they're going to find some way to capture your successful platform. It doesn't have to be that way, as I will demonstrate. Google.com, Facebook.com, Twitter.com, these are all domain names. Anyone can own a domain name. I own quite a few myself. For example, my blog is larrysanger.org. I own the domain name. My blog runs on the well-known free software called WordPress, which isn't the greatest thing in the world, but it works. It turns out to be important to our work on social media. So let's talk about it a little. WordPress runs close to 40% of all of the, right? There we go. WordPress runs close to 40% of all of the websites on the internet, quite a substantial number. A lot of people don't realize that. WordPress began and is still widely used as a blogging platform. That's what I use it for. But you can control the appearance of your site using themes and plugins, which basically make your website look any way and do almost anything. It's very extensible and diverse. So the KSF funds a prototype theme we temporarily named Minifeed. And here's how Minifeed version 1 looks after you install it on WordPress. Minifeed converts your blog into a social media feed. Pretty cool. We call them minis for short, and here's my mini installed on another domain I own called startthis.org. And here's how I post. Just hit return, and the site updates. I have a plugin installed that pushes all of my posts from StartThis to Twitter. So if you follow my Twitter account, some of my tweets say via StartThis, and that's what does it. Minifeed version 1 just converted the appearance of a blog into a social media feed. We are hard at work on version 2, which will allow you to follow minis owned and controlled by others who are writing on their own private domains. Minifeed creates a true network of totally independent websites, decentralized and self-owned, and having nothing to do with the corporate giants of Silicon Valley. That's a map. Twitter will not be able to block your account because you'll own your own account on your own website. They won't be able to keep you from following or being followed by someone else. That will be under your control and the control of those you're connected with, as it should be. We've given version 2 several design options, and various features like notifications will be added, as will interactions with other networks, not just individuals. You'll be able to see tweets from Twitter and posts from Facebook and pictures from Instagram all in one unified feed, and you'll be able to respond to them all from the same feed. Minifeed will be made available to the public under an open content license, an open source license when version 2 is finished. Version 2 is still under active development. So let's take a step back. What's the difference between Minifeed and platforms like Gab and Getter and even Mastodon? Each individual will own and control their own Minifeed on their own website. Individuals will interact directly with other individuals, peer-to-peer, who are also self-owners, and that interaction will eventually branch out to include networks. Minifeed was created for public conversation, just like Twitter and Facebook, but it is an independent project. So there is no platform and no private server that can permanently shut you down. You will own your own data and maintain control of your relationships. Even if some giant corporate website decides to stop hosting you, you can always find another web host and be up and running as you were before. You won't lose any followers. There are many hosts that advertise and support free speech. It would be hard to shut them all down. So we've been discussing social media, but encyclopedias don't employ user accounts and data in quite the same way. So can we say that encyclopedias are can we say that encyclopedias are centralized in the same way as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok? They are actually centralized in two ways. Google and other search engines push results from Wikipedia at users. Everyone regularly experiences this. If you make a general search, you almost always get back to Wikipedia articles at the top of your search results. But most encyclopedias are small in terms of traffic. They are rarely returned by search engines. So let's focus on Wikipedia. It is, after all, the 800-pound gorilla of encyclopedias. It has been ranked among the top 10 or 20 of websites worldwide for over a decade. Britannica, the second place contender, has much less influence relative to the general public. So Wikipedia dominates. And while it used to be the encyclopedia, whoops, that's interesting. Oh, I see. All right. I'll just have to pay attention to this. Can't see it on my screen anymore. Right. It used to be the encyclopedia anybody can edit. It is now carefully managed, Wikipedia is, by a band of largely anonymous partisans who have gradually twisted the site's neutrality policy so that articles are neutral only with respect to left-wing news publications and left-wing academia. What makes Wikipedia centralized is the fact that it is not an open network. It is a single website with a systemic ideological bias reflected in its articles. It is only as diverse as its media sources, which are primarily left-wing establishment sources. The collection of articles that is Wikipedia has a single owner, the Wikimedia Foundation, and is managed by a single entrenched group of volunteers who don't accept edits or articles that reflect anything but establishment views. They don't like external criticism, so Wikipedia is no open network. As it was in its early days, it has become closed and carefully controlled platform. What if instead we made an open network out of all the encyclopedias? That is what we, the KSF, are currently developing, the encyclosphere. For a rough idea of how it works, let's begin by looking at EncycloSearch, a KSF software project. Version 1 of EncycloSearch is simply an encyclopedia meta search engine. So when you do a search, it visits the search forms of a couple of dozen encyclopedias and then assembles the results, right? Of course, this isn't a network and not even a regular search engine, which would require collecting all of the text of all of the encyclopedias into a single database and then searching that. That would be a lot faster if we had it. Well, it turns out that that is closer to what EncycloReader, one of our newer projects, does. It searches its own local database of which contains its own copies of articles. When using this search method, it doesn't query any external search engines of encyclopedias to get results, so it's fast. When you click on a result, you see the article, but you're still on EncycloReader. If you can't see that, it says in the domain name encycloreader.org. So this is not just a search engine, it's also a content reader. In this case, the content comes from Citizendium. So how's that possible? Well, Citizendium, Wikipedia, and many other free online encyclopedias use an open content license, as it's called. And that allows anyone to republish their content, so EncycloReader takes advantage of the offer and republishes the content. So depending on your desire and ability, you could put copies, So depending on your desire and ability, you could put copies of all the free encyclopedias in the world in one place. And that's sort of what we're doing. But there's more to it than that. The KSF is neither building an encyclopedia, nor a platform, nor even a single search engine or encyclopedia reader. Rather, we're building an encyclopedia network. That means writing the software necessary to read and widely share all the free encyclopedic content that can be found online. In the end, we as an organization will not host encyclopedia search engines and readers like the ones that I've been describing. We don't want to compete with encyclopedias or encyclopedists. We want to serve them, and more importantly, their readers. We are building the software that anyone will be able to use to make their own encyclopedia search engines and collections, drawing from all of that encyclopedic content online, not just Wikipedia. Ideally, it will always be real-time current, and that's very cool, but it's actually a challenge to pull off. So to understand the concept, let's take a look at how EncycloReader works at present. This is in the process of changing. Say we type in a query, God, say. EncycloReader first searches its own locally stored files. And then separately, it searches external articles using a method like EncycloSearches, the meta-search engine approach. Whenever someone opens a new encyclopedia article on EncycloReader, then behind the scenes, EncycloReader saves a copy of the article to its database, and then that copy becomes another article to search. So as people open more new encyclopedia articles, they are stored by EncycloReader. And that makes the database larger and larger. We recognize the flaws in this early version of the system, and we're making improvements. But let me explain how EncycloReader stores articles, because this goes to the root of our endeavor. This is where we get into the actual technical standards that the Knowledge Standards Foundation is promoting. And the following part might get a little bit technical. I hope you won't be too intimidated. But this sort of gives you some practical, usable advice, especially if you're developers, about how to think about decentralized networks. Behind the scenes, articles are saved in the form of what are called ZWI files. So a ZWI file is a standardized file format. It's actually a kind of zip archive, that's all it is, with its content taken, or scraped is the word, from a free article on an encyclopedia website. So the software that takes an ordinary web page and converts it into a ZWI file is called ZWI Builder. We have written all of this software in the last year. We've also written some desktop software for exploring and editing ZWI files called ZWI Editor. That's what you're looking at right now. Within the ZWI file, there is a self-contained HTML copy of the article with some basic styling. We think it's pretty cool, even if it is of interest mainly to programmers. What is important is what programmers can do with all of this structured information. But I won't get into it in much detail now. I think the programmers out there can probably intuitively understand what you could do. A more lightweight version of the ZWI format is used to index proprietary articles like those behind paywalls, Britannica, etc., which cannot legally be shared. The text of the articles can't be. Even about those articles, we can still save some useful data called metadata. We use the JSON data format for this. It has the most basic information that you need to include the article in a search engine, things like a title and description, language, time last modified, and a source URL. So these files would not include the article text, but are instead just a list of what are called significant phrases. There are significant phrases that are in these sorts of stripped down ZWI files. A search engine can then index paywalled articles as well as free ones using those phrases. With a standard format, it's easy to make a search engine that indexes a whole lot of articles, some free and some proprietary. I said there were a whole lot of articles with ZWI files, but presently there is a limited number of articles indexed, about 90,000. We will be generating a lot more ZWI files, not tens of thousands, but millions, from all the encyclopedias in the world. At least that's the aim. How? Well, we've written another script called EncycloCrawler, and we've actually crawled a few whole encyclopedias. This is one strategy we're taking. Crawling simply means that we systematically visit and store the content of an entire website. EncycloCrawler goes through a whole encyclopedia and stores it entirely in the form of ZWI files. We have done that with a few encyclopedias, and the results can be found in both a new beta version of EncycloSearch, and the articles can be opened and read within EncycloReader as well. That is, of course, if they're free and not proprietary. I've gone into some detail about this, not to try to intimidate you with some technical jargon, but to demonstrate what's under the hood. It's a standard format. That's the important thing for encyclopedia articles, the ZWI format. This is under active development. So it's like RSS, but it's for encyclopedias. To summarize what we've done so far, first, with the ZWI file format, we're introducing and developing a standard that can represent all the world's encyclopedia articles. The ZWI file format does for encyclopedias what the RSS blogging standard did for news and blogs. Sorry, I need to go back. There we go. Second, with a crawler and other tools, we have started converting actual articles and whole encyclopedias to individual ZWI files and whole collections of ZWI files. And third, we've built the encyclopedia search engines, two of them, that can quickly search through those collections. So what are the next steps? This is where it starts getting more exciting, I think. We will work with publishers to give them new tools to save their articles in the ZWI format, so we won't have to crawl their sites. And if an article changes, these tools will insert the new version into a record of changes, then immediately push the resulting updated ZWI files to the network for anyone to use. The ZWI file format works unobtrusively with all existing publishing systems. This will not require the publishers to change their publishing systems, editorial standards, or styling in any way. Second, all collected encyclopedic data, as well as all of the software needed to build article search engines and readers, will be constantly updated, exchanged, and made publicly available. When this happens, the KSF will actually stop running its own search engines and readers. Again, we don't want to compete with encyclopedists. We will continue to support the software that others may install and use for this purpose. Within the next year or two, you'll be able to instantly search through all the English encyclopedias in the world. Each of these represents a different encyclopedia, and there are literally thousands of encyclopedias. All right? Will be very useful, with other languages soon to follow after English. The latest versions of all the free articles and the latest metadata about paywalled articles will be displayed instantly. Anyone will be able to write apps based on this data. The world will not be limited to using Wikipedia as their only source of encyclopedic information. We will have a giant network of encyclopedias, all linked by common data standard. We expect many kinds of publishers will use the network, including academics, and individual developers, little startups, government agencies, and so on. It will be a free and open network of knowledge. If you stop and think about it, the content of the network we're calling the encyclosphere has always been available to us. The Knowledge Standards Foundation is simply collecting all of that data and making it readily available to the world. We're not just collecting it ourselves, we're actually setting up a network so that it's shared by many different sources. The Knowledge Standards Foundation is developing an open content network. Think of all three words. This is a very powerful concept. The inventors of the blogosphere pioneered the concept of a giant body of content that is shared according to uniform defined standards. Or at least it's one of the early versions of that concept. Blog aggregators collect and make news feeds and blog feeds available to writers, web designers, and developers. All right? It has become an essential part of how news and opinion are still delivered today. People think that like RSS and the blogosphere are like gone or something of the 2000s. That's not. That's what runs news and opinion today. Well, why haven't we done the same with other categories of content? It's a good idea. It's an obvious idea, actually, if you think about it. It's what we should have been doing, not just with news and blogs, but also encyclopedias and social media and videos and other categories of content as well. We need to build the next internet around new decentralized content networks in this sense. And when I say decentralized, please don't limit your thinking to cryptocurrency. There's nothing wrong with cryptocurrency. But decentralization is actually much older than crypto. The blogosphere did not need crypto or blockchains to make a decentralized network of this sort. All we need, actually, to do it is tried and true technology that's been around for a long time. One more big topic to cover, and that is how to keep the networks open, keep them from being captured and closed by Silicon Valley or other power players. And this is an important topic that I find a lot of blockchain projects don't focus enough on. Within the next year, we will be systematically crawling, updating, and archiving articles from dozens, maybe hundreds of encyclopedias. We should make sure that the tools I've discussed, such as Zwi Builder, Encyclocrawler, and the Zwi format generally are as we want them to be before we start creating millions of Zwi files. Now, we've already experimented at the KSF with posting those articles to open data networks. When we are ready, we will devote more resources to this so that anyone will be able to build apps using them. Now, suppose you've written something that could serve as a decent encyclopedia article, and you just uploaded it to your academic web space or your blog. Could it be included in the encyclosphere? The answer is yes, of course. We've recently started working on actually two different solutions to this problem. This is one of them, NHub, that will allow people to push their articles directly to the encyclosphere which just for now means to the EncycloReader and EncycloSearch aggregators, but there will be more later. You provide the web address where your article resides, or maybe you paste the article itself into a ZWI file editor or a wiki page, and then let those programs do the formatting for you. And then the file is uploaded to the Encyclosphere with the proper ZWI formatting. So pretty cool. Now, imagine all the encyclopedias were publishing their own ZWI files to the Encyclosphere in the way that I described before. Then we could simply make a big, long list of all the ZWI files that can be found around the internet. Someone could assemble a sort of registrar of encyclopedic content, a whitelist or index of acceptable encyclopedias and articles. Well, that doesn't sound so good, but of course, since the data is decentralized, there could be multiple whitelists or indexes, and that's what we're going to be supporting. Different services with different interests or standards could publish very different whitelists, right? There's a name for a service that collects free content and makes it available. It's called an aggregator. For example, there are quite a few different blog aggregators which make blog posts from many different blogs available to users. An encyclopedia aggregator would work the same way. It would collect the contents of many encyclopedias in the form of ZWI files and make them available for various purposes, but mostly just searching and reading. The KSF has started 2 encyclopedia aggregators associated with our search engines, EncycloReader and EncycloSearch. I described them earlier, but their software is being refined now so that others can use their aggregator features. We have commitments from 2 or 3 other organizations to run their own aggregators. So it will be a truly decentralized network in practice, not just in theory. They would work something like this. This isn't a very good graphic. Listen to what I say more, then maybe it'll make a little bit of sense. When publishers such as Ballotpedia make changes to their articles, they will probably send automated requests to 1 or more aggregators to update their indexes. And for other encyclopedias, which don't change so often, an aggregator might just occasionally check pages in its index and then use EncycloCrawler to check for updates. Well, however the updates are found, they will be included in the aggregator's collection of ZWI files. And finally, those new or updated ZWI files are shared among the aggregators. They spread from one aggregator to others through data distribution networks, high speed. So we actually tried several possible ways to exchange data between aggregators, which is very important if you want to have true decentralization, such as the DAT protocol, the IPFS, which you've heard about, and BitTorrent. Our experiments with these data distribution networks have been very useful. We now understand much better exactly how to use them, and we've come to 2 conclusions. First, massive amounts of data need to be distributed between aggregators. This cannot happen easily at a large scale by any of the above data distribution networks. Instead, we have developed a prototype network of our own based on direct HTTP connections between participating servers. In other words, we're using the same old decentralized tech the internet itself is built on. Using this network, we're currently able to share and reconcile data across 4 different test aggregators. So I'm going to try to wrap this up. I think I'm going to have to skip over a lot of this or go very fast if we're going to get any questions in. The second conclusion is more tentative. With broad enough participation in the network, it's possible that BitTorrent can be used both by aggregators and by everyone else to distribute files more widely to the general public. To illustrate, suppose a college starts a general encyclopedia, basing their encyclopedia, or their software rather, on, let's say, EncycloReader. That's the purpose, to allow them to do this. So they make a copy of almost the entire encyclosphere, but they don't have the programmers to host, to serve many, many terabytes of data, vast amount of data, which would be required to host Wikipedia and a lot of other encyclopedias. So here is where both an aggregator and BitTorrent could help. The new encyclopedia could use the aggregator's API to search hundreds of terabytes of data if necessary. That's a lot. And then present the search results to its users the way it wants to. And then that doesn't require that much data. But when the user clicks on an article, a copy is fetched not from the encyclopedia's servers, but instead from BitTorrent. Or in other words, from anyone who has a copy of the ZWI file and can provide that copy to the end user quickly. So to reiterate without the technical jargon, EncycloReader and EncycloSearch are both being developed as free software that anyone will be able to install. It will allow researchers, students, professionals, corporations, and government agencies to create encyclopedia article collections, both specialized and general, which draw from a wide variety of sources. But they will not all have to host all of that content themselves. The precise same files can be distributed from many different from many different source points. Our plan then is to let editors using this software that we're developing choose from among encyclopedias and even among articles within encyclopedias and present them as their own unified resource. In this way, they should be able to use this software as the first real alternative to MediaWiki, which has been the go-to software for new encyclopedias for almost 20 years. It's the software that Wikipedia runs. To submit articles to this new kind of encyclopedia, writers could simply post an article to their own web space and then let encyclopedia editors decide whether or not to include it. In the long run, we will also have a decentralized article rating system, which should be pretty interesting, I think. So this then is the general architecture of a new and old sort of decentralized content network. We've already made great headway in the last year in implementing this vision. Most of this work was actually done by 2 part-time developers, if you can believe this. Imagine what we could do with more full-timers. Obviously, these people are really motivated. So at any rate, by the end of the year, we aim to accomplish the following goals. Well, I'm not going to read this because this just reiterates things I've already said. The whole system will put representations of general knowledge out of the control of Wikipedia and the establishment generally. And it is an example of the technology of freedom that is designed to stay free. And that's all I have. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Larry. We have a few minutes for questions, so if you're comfortable there, we can use this mic if anybody wants to pop up or at least be really loud from the audience. Any questions?
Probably have to pop up because I can't hear very well.
I might have missed it, but how are you going to protect this from being hijacked the way Twitter and the others were hijacked? And also, how is blockchain going to protect this system from infiltration?
Well,
can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I wasn't proposing a blockchain system at all. Quite the contrary. I don't think blockchain is necessary to achieve these purposes. As far as keeping it, making sure that it doesn't get hijacked, that actually is the whole point of having multiple aggregators that are independent of each other, each with different collections of encyclopedia articles, and also making sure that the source of record is websites, okay, which are run independently, and each ultimately will distribute its own ZWI files in the same way that blogs now distribute their own blogs. So Silicon Valley has tried to take over the blogosphere many times. That's basically what Medium was, and that's now what what is it called? The subscription. What is it? Yes, Substack, right. That's what Substack is trying to do too. Basically, they're trying to concentrate all of that power in one place. Substack might do it, but there's still a lot of independent blogs that run RSS. And as long as all of that data is organized using a common standard, RSS, then basically any software that serves bloggers and the blogosphere has to implement the RSS standard. So the same thing would be true of encyclopedias. So even if like one particular aggregator were like run by Google, which I fully expect to happen, it might have the biggest, fastest aggregator. There will be others that will be free and fast enough. And that's the general answer. Yes, please.
I think I know the answer to this, but how would you describe the difference between Mastodon and Minifeed?
And what?
Minifeed.
Oh, right. So Mastodon is a server-to-server federated network. So if you want to create an account on Mastodon, it actually is portable. You could take your information from one Fediverse instance like Mastodon to a different Fediverse instance, but it's a pain, and in a way, I don't know how easy that really is, and really it's more of a feudal kind of system, I guess you could say, right? And what we're talking about when we're talking about owning your own domains and running your own software on your own domains, and there's going to be ways to make that easy for grandma to do. Don't get me wrong. I think that's going to be possible in the long run, and grandpa and young people who know nothing about computers, Anyway, but the point is that if you own your own stuff, then you can be directly connected to people with ultimately, potentially anyway, without any intermediaries. We really, really want to build a system that is fully peer-to-peer and that doesn't even necessarily depend on aggregators, but that's going to be really hard. We're pretty sure that isn't possible, but at least you'll be able to have a lot of the experience available. Yep.
Lunch will be on the other side of the room here after the questioning.
Larry, what role has In-Q-Tel played in the corruption of Silicon Valley? And
Has what?
In-Q-Tel.
In-Q-Tel. Ah.
Yeah, that's basically a government-funded venture capital firm that invests in people like this. Thiel is unfortunately accepted money from it, which is why I don't really trust him. But I think a lot of us are just asking, what happened to Silicon Valley? We can remember all these debates about net neutrality at the physical layer, and now net neutrality's gone. So I guess what do you think we could do about that?
I'm not an expert on Silicon Valley and Silicon Valley finance. I've tried to keep my hands clean of all of that stuff. That's why I'd never spent much time on the coasts. Live in Ohio and fly over country, but I think that Silicon Valley and a lot of the tools that we depend upon were deliberately developed by some extremely rich and influential people and governments, like the CIA is supposed to have had a hand in the development of Facebook, just for example. And it was never going to be, once it got into the hands of these centralizing corporate forces, it was never going to remain the same. It was always meant to get to where it is today. The reason why it was the internet was more of a libertarian place, basically back in the 1980s and 90s and the early 2000s, was that it was still like a niche thing that was mostly for developers. And developers, when they're dealing with technology, like to be free to do whatever. And they just get pissed off when somebody, makes some useful tool proprietary and say, oh, well, we're going to write our own version of an operating system or our own version of a web server or whatever, and the rest of that. And so that actually worked through the 1990s. But then, when certain projects like Twitter and YouTube, it all started changing between 2005 and 2010, essentially. Twitter actually ran an open standard, a data standard for social media in its first few years, and people even started writing apps based in it that allowed people to tweet from other networks and interact and so forth with Twitter from other sites. And then they just shut it down. That was not by accident. That they did it partly for filthy lucre, of course, but also partly because the people behind the funding of such things actually care more about the power involved in technology. That's my opinion. I can't really prove it very rigorously, but that's the impression that I have, for what it's worth.
Maybe last one.
So I appreciate the work you're doing and all these decentralized ideas, blockchain and all this other stuff. But when it comes to things like social media and the big tech companies, forming their own aggregates, like you said, might happen. How do we make this stuff more accessible to the general public? Because I think that's a big issue with a lot of these decentralized platforms. Is they're really hard. You have to have a lot of technical knowledge, or you're posting on a WordPress site or something.
Yeah.
And I think these are important things to explore. I know this is a long-term thing,
right?
But it's hard to imagine someone like Grandma getting on and
Yeah,
installing a WordPress plugin.
So did you hear the question? Okay, good. It's a very hard question. The people who care a lot about liberty tend the developers often tend to be like back-end people who don't really care about design, and they don't care that much about user experience, and that's just sad. And that needs to change. That's one thing. I actually think if you really care about liberty and you're a developer and you know something about design and UX and front end optimization, etc., SEO, then you should really volunteer some of your time for some of these projects. That's kind of important. But that's just a general point. In terms of like mini feed, we are trying to make it as much a turnkey solution as possible. Fortunately, the guy who's the lead developer for mini feed, he actually is in Europe, and I think he cares as much about liberty as anybody, and he's a really good designer. And what he keeps pushing me to do is to like make a deal with Epic or someone, which is a web host that's very all about free speech, or someone, right, to create basically a turnkey solution. So basically the sales pitch is this. You say people, so you all agree that you want to be independent of big tech, right? And, yes, we want to be independent of big tech. Okay, good. And you also think it's really good idea to own your own data, right? Yeah. Yes, okay, that's okay. Well, doesn't that mean you have to pay for your data? Yes, it does. That means you have to buy your own domain name, and it also means that you're going to have to run your own server. Sorry, it's true. So the challenge, the technical challenge of the next 5 years for developers, I think, right now, and I'm talked to a number of different developers who agree with me strongly on this, and they're working on it too, at full tilt. Basically, to make it a lot easier for people to register domain names and install software on it and so forth. So what we want to do is create a turnkey solution. Somebody goes to, like, again, maybe it's Epic, or maybe it's like some other, we haven't made any deals with Epic yet, or who knows. I'm just using them as an example. So free speech provider, and basically you just go there and type in a domain name, hit submit, and pay the fee, and lo and behold, you have your own website, and everything is ready for you. You can change it behind the scenes, or have a developer change it behind the scenes as much as you want. So it's like a regular hosting account after that, but everything is set up in a way that is as easy as possible. So that sort of thing, I think, is would be a good idea. I mean, it could even be as potentially easy as making it part of like an iOS app, I imagine. So who knows? We'll see. We really need to build that technology of freedom. Basically, if you don't build the tools, then we're going to continue to suffer under tech tyranny. Right now, it's because we do not have a lot of the technology of freedom available. So we need to build it.
Cool. Thanks, Larry. Thanks, everyone, for coming.